Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, oil is on the rise this morning following the latest developments in the Middle East. Hamas says Israel killed its political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, in an airstrike on Tehran. Haniyeh is a chief negotiator for Hamas. He was in Iran's capital for the inauguration of the country's new president. Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem says the killing follows the recent death of another top-level Hamas official.
It's very, very impressive in terms of operations. We're talking about two Middle East capitals, two very senior targets with apparently very limited damage around them, kind of surgical strikes that could also be considered of strategic value. So in a sense, Netanyahu will have burnished his credentials here, having been battered by the October 7th attacks that really blindsided Israel and caused casualties on an unprecedented scale.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams says Haniyeh's death follows an Israeli strike on Beirut last night, targeting a senior Hezbollah commander. That attack was a response to a rocket assault that killed 12 young people in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights over the weekend.
Now, Nathan, to another major story we're following this morning. The latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll of 7 battleground states conducted after President Joe Biden dropped out of the race shows Vice President Kamala Harris in a statistical tie with Republican nominee Donald Trump. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
Harris is riding a wave of enthusiasm among young Black and Hispanic voters. More than a third of voters in the 7 battleground states said they're much more likely to vote now that the contest is between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And the numbers rose to 49% and 44% among Black and Hispanic voters, respectively. Almost 2/3 of Black voters say they are now somewhat or much more likely to cast ballots in November. The numbers suggest Harris has a shot at reassembling the voter coalition that propelled President Barack Obama to the White House. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. Now, Vice President Harris is honing her campaign on those battleground states and focusing on the issue that Donald Trump's been looking to use against her, border security. At a rally in Atlanta, Georgia, Harris said the former president helped tank a bipartisan border bill in Congress earlier this year.
So here is my pledge to you. As president, I will bring back the border security bill that Donald Trump killed.
Vice President Harris now plans to tour all 7 battleground states next week with her new running mate. She hasn't picked one yet, but a source tells Bloomberg News she's going to do interviews this week. Harris's VP shortlist is said to include Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly.
Well, Nathan, we turn to the markets now in reaction to a slew of earnings. Shares of Microsoft down more than 2% this morning. The company's Azure cloud computing service posting a slowdown in quarterly growth. As Bloomberg technology host Ed Ludlow reports, that's disappointing investors anxious to see a payoff from huge investments in artificial intelligence products.
Ultimately, Microsoft Azure cloud services growth is slowing while capital expenditures are going up. So Azure's cloud services saw 29% top line growth, 8% contribution specifically from artificial intelligence. That was up from a 7% contribution from AI in the prior quarter. But this is a quarter where, one, you don't miss estimates, the street punishes you, but also we know that it's about the money machine, right? Investors look very closely at the money going in on AI, investment into infrastructure. For Microsoft, there was a significant jump there. They're finding it hard to see the money coming out. Ed Ludlow for Bloomberg News in New York City.
All right, Ed, thank you. And on the flip side, shares of Advanced Micro Devices are up more than 9%. The chipmaker gave an upbeat revenue forecast, underscoring its new artificial intelligence processors are boosting growth.
And Nathan, shares of Tokyo Electron and ASML are surging this morning. The gains come after Reuters reported the Biden administration planned to exempt chip equipment makers in Japan, the Netherlands, and South Korea from upcoming export restrictions.
Thank you. And shares of NVIDIA are up about 5%. It's been renamed the top U.S. chip stock pick at Morgan Stanley. Analysts there say the recent sell-off in NVIDIA provided a good entry point.
Well, Nathan, we stay in the semiconductor space, and Intel is planning to eliminate thousands of jobs. We get the details with Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The cuts are aimed at reducing cost and funding an ambitious effort to recover from a slump in earnings and a loss of market share. We are told the cuts may be announced as early as this week. Intel has about 110,000 employees, excluding workers at units being spun off. CEO Pat Gelsinger is spending heavily on research and development to help Intel return to prominence in the semiconductor industry. Rivals such as Advanced Micro Devices have caught up and taken market share. Intel is scheduled to report second quarter earnings on Thursday. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thanks. In Europe, shares of HSBC are up 4%. Earnings topped estimates, and the bank also announced a $3 billion stock buyback. We caught up with Noel Quinn, who just finished his final quarter as boss of HSBC.
I'm feeling really good. I think we've delivered a very strong set of results in the first 6 months of this year, following a record profit year last year. So really pleased that we've delivered a return on tangible equity of 17%, excluding notable items.
HSBC's Noel Quinn will hand over the CEO reins to the current chief financial officer, Georges El-Hedri, in September.
The big event on the economic front comes this afternoon, Nathan, when the Fed makes a policy decision. While no move is expected, investors will be looking for clues if a September rate cut is on tap. And we get more from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The central bank is not expected to change interest rates today, but what they say and how they say it is what Wall Street is looking for. They're not offering new forecasts or a dot plot update, but Fed officials are widely expected to signal a rate cut may be coming at their September meeting. The question is, how specific will they be in the statement or in Chairman Powell's news conference? How much confidence do they have that inflation is coming down and that the economy is not weakening too much? Will they be explicit or just offer hints they can back away from? Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Michael, thank you. And please join us for special coverage of the Fed decision. It all begins at 1:30 p.m. on Bloomberg Radio and television and YouTube.
And Karen, we got a central bank decision in Asia. The Bank of Japan raised its benchmark interest rate and unveiled plans to halve bond purchases, underscoring the BOJ's determination to normalize monetary policy. And the yen is moving higher on the news. Right now, it's stronger by 1.3% against the dollar, trading at 150.77.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. The Carter Center says it was unable to verify the results of Venezuela's presidential election. The Atlanta-based group also blaming authorities for a complete lack of transparency and declaring Nicolas Maduro the winner. Meanwhile, Venezuelan government leaders are ratcheting up attacks on their opponents. They included calls for the arrest of opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez, whose supporters say won by a landslide. Senators from both sides of the aisle had a joint committee congressional hearing on the attempted Trump assassination. Say they're not satisfied with Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle's resignation. Lawmakers are calling for a fundamental restructuring of the agency. Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin called for more transparency from the FBI and the Secret Service.
We have to have transcribed interviews of all the Secret Service personnel at the site, people involved in the planning. This is just table stakes, and we need those interviews fast. We need them now because memories fade.
Acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rose says that he's ashamed of the failures that allowed a gunman to fire 8 shots at the former president. The Park Fire in Northern California became the 5th largest wildfire in state history. Evacuation orders were lifted in the town of Paradise, which was leveled in 2018 by a campfire that killed 85 people. This man lost his home in that fire. Yesterday, he and his wife returned to find the home that they had rebuilt destroyed again.
I can't say it's easier the second time, but you're more numb to it the second time around, obviously.
Firefighters could face triple-digit temperatures in the days ahead. By a vote of 91-3, the Senate passed a package of internet safety bills aimed at keeping kids safe online. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Now we call on the House to pass these common-sense, bipartisan, life-saving bills.
Senators Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and Ron Wyden voted against the package, citing concerns about freedom of speech. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Nathan and Karen.
All right, John, thank you. Time now now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Looks like the Yankee winning streak is going to end in Philadelphia. The day began with Garrett Cole's start being pushed back a few days due to arm fatigue. So Will Warren made his major league debut. Austin Hayes hit a 3-run homer off him. The Phillies led 4-1. The Yanks came back. Their new third baseman, Jazz Chisholm, who hit 2 home runs Monday, hit a solo shot in the 6th inning, then came up with 2 on in the 7th.
Strom's pitch is swung on, hit deep to right. Back goes Castellanos at the wall. Oh, baby, another one. Adios, amigo. Smooth Jazz does it again.
UFA the call. Yanks led 5-4 until a Clay Holmes wild pitch bottom of the 9th. Neither team scored in the 10th inning. Both scored in the 11th. Only the Yankees scored in the 12th. They won 7-6, go for a series sweep this afternoon. Only one player in Major League history had previously done what Chisholm has now done, 4 home runs over the first 3 games with a new team. At Citi Field, the Mets followed up Monday's 15-2 rout of the Twins with a 2-0 shutout. Superb pitching from Sean Manaea. At the trade deadline, the Mets acquired a starting pitcher, Paul Blackburn from Oakland. The Yankees added 2 relievers, including Mark Leiter Jr. from the Cubs. He actually pitched the 10th inning last night. Among the events today at the Paris Olympics, though, women's 1,500 meters. Katie Ledecky owns the 19 fastest times ever. She's the heavy favorite, as the women's gymnastics team was yesterday, and they prevailed with the gold medal that eluded them 3 years ago in Tokyo. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. The Middle East is bracing for further violence after the death of Hamas's political leader. The Iran-backed militant group says Ismail Haniyeh was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Tehran. And now Iran's supreme leader is promising, quote, severe retaliation. For the latest, we are joined now by Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Kevin, good morning. What is the latest that we know about this assassination?
Well, you know, as is usual in cases like this, Israel has been reasonably silent on it, but obviously the Hamas has blamed Israel for this assassination attempt, which appears to have been carried out in Iran at his residence. So this obviously is coming on the heels of another attack Israel said it carried out in killing a Hezbollah commander in Lebanon. So it's sparking a lot of concern that this could intensify the conflict, widen the conflict even. And also sort of dashes some hopes for possible ceasefire negotiations, since Haniyeh was sort of the main interlocutor in the various talks between, you know, sort of that were being brokered between Israel and Hamas.
And in the meantime, you mentioned the killing of that senior Hezbollah commander in response to the Golan Heights attack. Up to now, that had been seen as something of a muted response. But what could the response be now that we have 2 major leaders of Iran-backed groups taken out in the Middle East?
Well, that's just right. It does have the potential to escalate things, one coming on the heels of the other. And this one is the second one is particularly embarrassing for Iran, which obviously backs both financially and militarily, backs both Hamas and Hezbollah to varying degrees. It's very embarrassing for Tehran since it happened, you know, inside their own country. So they may well feel that they need to respond. And obviously Israel could, depending on what happens, then widen it out further. So there are very stark concerns about this. You've seen the price of oil go up on it. But at the same time, Iran had been looking for ways to ease some of the sanctions they're under, and there's been some talk about possibly reaching out to the West. So, you know, there's still a path away from an escalation here. It's just not clear that's where it's going to be headed.
But as you mentioned, Ismail Haniyeh was also a key figure in the negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. I mean, does this just throw that process up in the air now?
Well, it definitely does. I think we're going to wait to see what the real reaction is. We've seen the reaction from Qatar so far, but it's sort of more in the form of a question, which is sort of how do you expect to have negotiations when you kill one of the chief negotiators? So we'll have to see in the coming days and weeks what that actually means for this. You know, keep in mind, Hamas is under a ton of pressure from the Israeli assault. And so it is, there are some of the various dynamics that were pushing them towards the talks are obviously still there, but this does make it a lot harder for either side to trust in the idea of a ceasefire.
Of course, the next U.S. president is going to have to deal with Middle East tensions, foreign policy as well. And we have a new look at the state of the presidential race in our latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll. Kind of a shift in the dynamic now with Kamala Harris on top of the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, it's really interesting just how much that shifted where you did have, Trump with a reasonably clear lead. It's now basically showing up as a statistical tie in most of the key battleground states. I think to me the most interesting figure in the poll was you're seeing in a number of different key groups that Democrats need to win, sort of blacks and young voters and women. You're seeing a much higher propensity, the likelihood of plan to actually vote in November. So obviously turnout is in all of these states is going to be an enormous factor. And I think that had been something that was really weighing on the Democrats when Biden was still atop the ticket, this notion that people would just stay home. They didn't like their choices. So seeing that a lot of people in their key demographics are now a lot more likely to turn out in November, that's going to buoy a lot of hopes in the Harris camp.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.